G'day guys, I'm D-Mac from NBA Fantasy Bible, and along with me is Kayla Fonte. Together we're Between Two Hoops. Kayla, how are you going?
I'm doing well. Excited for the start of the season. How about you?
Oh, what are we? Less than 2 days away. I cannot wait. Cannot wait. Most fantasy drafts have been run and won, but it doesn't mean that you've definitely won or lost your league. And now we're about to talk about our tips and tricks and how to navigate through the regular season. Shall we get into it?
Let's do it.
All right. Tips and tricks. Now, just very generically, just to start with, first tip is to understand and know your team, but understand player values. And we'll talk about trades a little bit later on and how you can navigate trades, but understand your player that is on your team or your entire team and understand their values in terms of points leagues and category leagues, because there can be a vast difference between them. And you can take advantage of that in either a trade or even picking players up off the waiver wire. Just understand those player values, but also how does a player or a group of players fit into your particular build? Of course, we're talking about category leagues in that aspect, but of course, knowing your worst players is also really important, whether that's category or points leagues. Now, we'll talk about that a little bit later on, particularly when we start talking about smashing the waiver wire and picking up those hot free agents. But also, if you do receive a trade request, always be skeptical, because more often than not, another GM will try to take advantage or perhaps try to win a trade. But always be skeptical, but be open to the trade request. Don't quickly dismiss it until you analyze it properly. And perhaps maybe you can communicate with the other GM as well. But we'll get into that a little bit later.
Yeah, especially with
Next
points
one.
leagues too. I'll speak a little bit there to that
Yeah.
as the points expert here. But traditionally with a points league, the best value is going to come from high usage players, high scoring. And the big thing too is that efficiency isn't going to matter as much in points leagues as it is with a category league. So I will say
Absolutely. We've
that.
seen, big time. We've seen quite differing values when it comes to points versus categories with someone like Jalen Williams, who's so efficient. His field goal and his free throw percentage really does help you, but he's less valuable in a points league. Doesn't mean he's not valuable at all, but he's just less valuable. All right, next one. Be patient yet flexible.
Yeah, so with these younger guys, especially with rookies, there's a lot of growing pains that are associated with their game. We saw this a lot with Scoot Henderson, for example, last year. We said for a long time to hold on to him, and he did provide solid value, but you have to be patient with these kind of guys. He was a bad example here because he did end up being a drop at some point, but later in the season, we saw him really explode and go off. And that is the case with a lot of these rookies. They're getting adjusted to the NBA game, and it's very important that you don't overreact and you see based off of a couple of games bad production and you immediately just drop them. It's really a waiting game, especially if there's no better waiver wire options. You kind of have to stick it out. But at the same time, if you see someone who's really going off and they're having that consistent role, good production, you do have to be prepared to make the change and get that free agent pickup. And the important thing here, as you mentioned, is to know your NBA team's depth charts. There's a lot of resources that we'll talk about later, especially ESPN, where you can see these depth charts. And that will help you identify who the next player up would be, who will get more value when there's people resting due to back-to-backs and things like that.
Absolutely. Now, you look at that slide there and you've said be patient on the younger guys, but also be prepared to make a hot free agent pickup. It sounds contradictory, but it's not, because we know that
Mhm.
some of these younger guys take a little bit of time. But if there's someone else that's just going to be middling and doesn't have that upside, be prepared to drop them. We went back to the previous slide where we talked about knowing your worst player. Be prepared to make that hot free agent pickup on someone who's a bit boring or who's not going to be a potential top 50 or top 100 guy, to make that hot free agent pickup. And we saw it last season, very early on. Jalen Johnson, we were really massive on him. He didn't start to commence the season, but it only took about a week for him to get that starting role over Sadiq Bey. And as soon as that happened, it was go time. Go and pick him up. And we were very, very hot on that. So it's going to happen again. It happens every single season. It may not happen as much as it did in previous seasons, but just be prepared to really drop the guy that's just going to be boring, because for you to be successful in your fantasy league, you need to be able to get guys that are going to provide you really good value and jumps of value as well, not guys that are going to be middling all the way through your entire roster. Next one, breaking news. Make sure you follow certain accounts on Twitter or X. Now, it's really important that you do get this because it could be the difference between you acquiring a hot free agent um, and someone else getting them and really taking advantage. So obviously follow us on Twitter at NBA Fantasy Bible and Kayla at Kayla_Fonte. But there's a whole raft of fantasy analysts that do a lot of daily wrap-ups. Kayla, I'm sure you'll be doing that this season as well. So I loved what you were doing last season, but there's a whole heap. Kingy does it. Alex Burns does it. So these are fantastic daily wrap-ups. And of course, there's going to be daily wrap-up shows as well. So keep an eye out for that from us. We probably won't do it on the daily like Josh Lloyd does or Dan Bespris, but we'll try to do it as often as possible. But in the meantime, Twitter is just the best means to get your immediate news. Follow team-specific beat writers. We're not going to go through all 30 teams and their best beat writer, but just have a look through Twitter and just have a look at some of those primary beat writers as well, because you can get a really quick glance, or very good information on team rotations, potential injury news as well. So keep an eye out for that. Shams, of course, he's the number one, I guess, media guy in the NBA now that Woj has now departed the media landscape, that is, not departed the world, but just the media landscape. So make sure you follow him. And of course, some well-known fantasy basketball sites, RotoWire NBA, Roto World Basketball, and Roto Baller as well. So give those all a follow on Twitter.
And a big thing here too, also turn your alerts on for these kind of accounts. Yes, it will be annoying getting all that information from 10 different accounts, but it will help you in the long run.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Next one, fantasy basketball websites.
So there's a lot of really good sources out there that will help you win your league. Two of the biggest ones are #basketball and Basketball Monster. There's a lot of resources here like rankings. I don't believe that Basketball Monster has points league rankings, but # does, and it's customizable. So you can input your own league settings into there. There's a lot of ADP data that you can see, fantasy trade analyzers, waiver wire pickups, and things like that. And you can also get like blurbs and player information from places like FBI, RotoWire, RotoWorld, and sources like that. And another important thing that we touched on earlier is ESPN depth charts. That's how you can help identify six-man people, who's going to be stepping up when there's injuries and things like that. And Established to Run is also a good source for that as well.
Yeah, knowing those rankings from #basketball and Basketball Monster does definitely help you in terms of understanding trade value, assessing how certain builds fit as well with a trade as well. So yeah, very, very beneficial. But of course, as we've liked to say on previous episodes, just straight NICAP rankings doesn't mean everything. So it may look like on the surface one team definitely wins a certain trade, and we'll get to it shortly when we start talking about trade specifically. But this is why I really despise trade vetoes, particularly by the league as well. So on paper or on the surface, it looks like one team definitely wins the trade. But when you look at it from a build perspective, perhaps both GMs benefit. But we'll get to that very shortly. And when I say shortly, I mean now. So buying low and selling high. So when we're talking about trades, timing does matter. I've got Joel Embiid here as an example of when to sell high. So obviously we know of his upside, his per game outstanding fantasy contributions, but we also need to understand the greater landscape, just the bigger picture here. And so timing does matter. So if you can sell high on certain players who you think are overperforming, you do so. And same goes on the flip side, buying low on certain guys that maybe in the first couple of weeks, it's taking some time to build some synergy with our new teammates. I'm thinking perhaps it's a Domantas Sabonis, De'Aaron Fox, DeMar DeRozan situation in Sacramento, where it may take some time for them to gel together. And if it's taking some of that time, maybe you can take advantage and really shoot off a bit of a sell high opportunity of your guy versus their buying low. So yeah, just keep an eye out for those sort of situations. The old 2-for-1. Now, it does work in some leagues, but I think a lot of managers are very switched on to that sort of thing. And when I say 2-for-1, that's offering up two of your guys who are worth less than the one that you're trying to acquire. It still definitely does work, but it's not as prevalent as it used to be. So it could still be a matter of a 2-for-2 or a 3-for-3, and just trying to find that balance. but also be open to communicate with opposing GMs, because a trade doesn't necessarily have to be won or lost by the teams. It could actually be beneficial to both GMs, particularly if it fits a certain build that you've got in place, a punt build. And we're talking about categories here specifically, less so in points leagues, but still same premise when it comes to the 2-for-1s or the 2-for-2s. Just be mindful of that, but also be mindful of the depth of your league. If it's a 12-team standard size league, then you always replenish. If you are doing a 2-for-1 or a 3-for-1 and you're getting the less quantity of players back to the higher quality guy, just know that with the shallower leagues like a 12 or shallower league, you can replenish with some good quality guys off the waiver wire. But the deeper you go, it makes it really difficult to get some good quality off that waiver wire because it is very, very thin. So sometimes in those opportunities, it's actually better to get the more depth and getting more quantity of decent guys as opposed to the higher rated guy. And just know your team or know your league mates. Some guys just love trades. They love trading for the sake of trading. So understand that and perhaps just throw them some trades and perhaps they just go for it. I'm not saying you're going to fool them, but maybe they just go for it because they just love trading. And also understand when your trade deadline is. It's going to differ from league to league, and oftentimes we'll just go with a default trade deadline, but just understand when it is, because then you could take advantage for, particularly in situations where there's a guy that's playing on a team. I'm thinking of Lauri Markkanen. It's a team like Utah who we expect they're going to struggle this season, but knowing when that trade deadline is could help you determine when you should maybe try to acquire him or maybe when you should offload him as well. So just be mindful of that. Knowing the schedule.
Yeah, knowing the schedule is huge. I did an article on this earlier in the year, and I think it's just so important to really know how many games you can expect your players to play each week. And hashtag basketball is a great resource for this because they'll sort it out based on a grid. So it's very customizable too. You can look at who's playing each day, or you can sort it by the week, and you could even see the total weeks throughout the whole season. And it's also customizable to your league. So you can see Yahoo, Fantrax, ESPN, because they all do differ in that sense. But also check the weekly schedules. It'll help you with your streaming options. If you see that if a team is only playing 2 games in a week, you're probably not going to stream from them. But if a team has 4, that would be a good bulk streaming option for you. And also daily versus weekly lineups, sitting and start decisions. That'll also help you determine who to sit and start. There's a lot of teams that are going to play on each given day, but also when you have, like I said before, a team playing 4 games in a week, that's a good bulk opportunity. And it's also very important to know your schedule for that playoff period. I believe the Mavericks are in the same kind of situation as they were last year, where they have some very short playoff weeks. So that could even potentially be some trades before the trade deadline where you can get a better player who will be playing more in the stretch of the playoffs. And also back-to-backs as well. Sorry, you were going to say something?
Oh, no, absolutely. I agree with you.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Like the playoff schedule is super important. And that's why it's also very important to know what your league schedule is. And back-to-backs too. There's a lot of players that we know, like Al Horford, Joel Embiid now, Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, for example, who will be missing back-to-backs. So that opens up new streaming opportunities, and you really have to know when those back-to-backs are happening so you can plan for them appropriately and work the waiver wire.
Absolutely. And some lesser likes could actually take advantage. So Al Horford, there's not a great deal of sense of depth behind him. So someone like a Luke Cornett, who you'd never even think about drafting, could be a very viable streaming option in those situations. Of course, Andre Drummond is a very popular late round guy because of the situation with Embiid, not just because of the back-to-backs, but also just the general health concerns. Working the wire. Now, this is particularly important later on in the season, but it's still really important to really get off to a strong start in your league, because you don't want to be chasing your tail and chasing games as well. So firstly, know how many acquisitions your league has. It should be pretty obvious, but some leagues have up to 7, some have 2 or 3. So knowing how many acquisitions you have helps you determine how crazy you're going to go with your streaming. We did say be patient, particularly early in the season. This was early in the episode, but towards the end of the season, you're trying to maximize games played. So this is where you need to stream like crazy. And if you have 7 acquisitions, then that's 1 a day. Or you can really make the most of those back-to-backs and start streaming 2 slots as well. And that's super, super aggressive. But particularly in points leagues, that's going to help you really maximize those points. But it's also very beneficial in category leagues as well. So understanding those acquisitions is very, very important. Also, understanding your strengths and weaknesses, but also on the flip side, understanding your opponent's strengths and weaknesses. And we've said that in previous episodes, some people love to punt. I'm more of the approach of being a balanced team. And depending on those acquisitions, if you've got a multitude of acquisitions, you can really hammer home a particular category or categories to really take advantage of a weakness of your opponent as well. So, yeah, knowing what they're weak in, and also knowing if they've got injuries on their team, you really start focusing on those weaknesses and just going in for the kill. And again, I think we've said this 3 times now, know your worst players, because working that wire, I said, if you want to be aggressive, you could stream 2 slots towards the end of the season or even middle of the season. Know who your worst players are, because you could just continually stream that spot, and it's going to be very difficult to beat you in those categories or even points leagues for that matter.
And that's even really important with the real life trade deadline. You have to know your worst players, because if a trade goes down where there's a player who clearly benefits from that value, you got to be ready to drop and pick them up. And that's also an important time to really watch out with your waiver wire pickups too. You really want to save those ads for what happens after the trade deadline in the fallout.
Absolutely. And we'll have a trade deadline show, of course, this season. Obviously, it'll be a live one. But yeah, we always say save your acquisitions, because who knows what's going to happen at trade deadline. You need to be able to pick up those guys. And also, you may be picking up multiple dudes and dropping them depending on the gravity of a potential trade as well. Now, it's a good segue, because knowing your worst player also helps you pick up some of these hot guys that are younger guys at the end of the season. But take us through the underperforming teams.
Yeah, there's a handful of underperforming teams this year, but these could really be fantasy gold mines later in the season, especially with a lot of rest and stars sitting out at this point. If they're not going to make the playoffs, there's no reason for them to play. So it's really a time for younger guys to step up, like Noah Clowney, Scoot Henderson, Klingon. There's a lot of options here who could be really great waiver wire pickups at some point of the season. There's a lot of young dudes to watch out for. There's a lot of sleeper picks, and we talked about that in our show that we did a couple of days ago. But there's a lot of options definitely to consider this year. Noah Clowney is a big breakout of mine. Scoot Henderson is coming off a really disappointing year, but I think it's an opportunity for him to turn things around. Klingon as well. He's buried in the depth chart, but the Portland Trailblazers, they're not competing for a championship. So it's very likely that at some point he will see those starts. And these are all trends that you have to watch out for with these kinds of teams. If they're not making the playoffs, expect the stars to sit out. This is a time that they're going to run with the young guys. Even Keontae George on the Jazz. Markkanen will not be playing very many games down the stretch. Taylor Hendricks. Those are guys you just got to look out for.
100%. Yeah, it's really important, because Klingon could actually be a big player around trade deadline. DeAndre Ayton seems to always be in trade rumors as well. So, yeah, towards the end of the season particularly, but also around that trade deadline. But, yeah, just be flexible and understanding those depth charts. Okay. That's a wrap, Kayla. Now, nice and short episode today. Any final words? What's coming up?
Yeah, still working on the positional tiers for now, but a lot of tweets as well. I have a whole schedule worked out for daily content, so stay tuned for that.
Absolutely. Now, we have opening night less than 2 days away, which is super exciting. You've got Bitches Be Balling as well.
Yes. Yes, we're going to record an episode soon, and we're going to be talking a lot about how to make time for fantasy, which I think is something that a lot of people struggle with. So it's going to be a very resourceful episode.
I'll be
And even
tuning
to
in.
mention
I
too,
need that.
Yuri and I put together a list full of resources that beginners and experienced players as well can use for getting ready for fantasy and maintaining it throughout the season.
Absolutely. Some that we've discussed today, but check out that tweet on the Bitches Be Balling on the page, right? On the Bitches Be Balling page, or
Yes,
is that by
BBB
yourself?
Fantasy Hoops on Twitter.
Okay. All right. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Kayla. Before we go, just making sure that you know where to find us. As we said, at NBA Fantasy Bible for myself and at Kayla_Fonte. Make sure you like and subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on all of our other platforms. But until next time, thank you, Kayla. See you guys.
Thank you.